Communal storytelling versus egoistic railroading. What makes a good story? We are hardwired for storytelling. It's human nature to hear, respond to, and present our stories as part of culture, identity, and religion. Good stories have some elements in common. Here are a few. 1. There is one message. The moral of the story is not a trope, it is a necessity. Every story, from The Lord of the Rings to the Gospel of Luke, has a message that can be summed in a single sentence and appreciated by its audience. When designing encounters or a multi-session campaign, begin with the one-sentence message, called the meta-narrative. 2. Make it personal. Your memories and life experience are your greatest asset to storytelling. Anything that illustrates struggles you've experienced, failures felt, triumphs celebrated, love and loss, and barriers overcome makes your story authentic and compelling. You have to be willing to show your vulnerability. Good fiction has threads of reality woven through it, and the most moving stories of the human experience are the ones that resonate with our personal and uniquely lived experiences. While your consumers cannot resonate with the entirety of your story, they will resonate with something of it. But whenever possible, choose your story rather than imagine telling someone else's. And if you do tell someone else's story, then make sure you spend enough time with them to collect data, the who, what, when, where, and why of the story. This way, your fiction is woven into and through their lived experiences. 3. You are not the hero of the meta-narrative. We'll explore this in future sessions, but the key to communal storytelling's effectiveness is inclusion. When we bring others into a narrative as heroes, they invest and find moments of joy from the engagement. When you make yourself the hero, or God, you eliminate the opportunity for others to be the hero with you. Remove yourself from the meta-narrative and make room for the other. This is why we refer to the game manager as a steward and not a master. Stewards manage, safeguard, and nurture the story that belongs to the table at large, to all players. Moving away from the language of supremacy and control is a good practice in every situation today. 4. Know the audience. Generational theory, cultural history, local folklore, and empathetic listening are paramount to presenting stories that move and care for others. How you play is how you live. This means that role-playing is a vital component of the formation and development of human identity. When we tap into the struggle, heartache, longing, and hope of our audience, we allow them, through our stories, to practice a response to real-life stimuli and situations. We then make space for the audience to come together and create a new story in the role-playing imagination, which then becomes real to the audience in ways that were impossible before our games. Knowing your audience is vital to change-making and healing both generational wounds and modern ones. How do we tell stories as a community? Every time we attempt to tell a story, we call together a community. Storytelling presumes a community of listeners who recognize the experience being relayed, or who can imagine themselves in the story being told. Storytelling is a call and response method in which the storyteller calls the community, and then the community responds in resonance, becoming we from the experience. Then we respond in kind, letting go of ego and individuality to stimulate the unique development of a worldview in response to the story. Meaning is made between people. We make meaning when we approach the other, whether that is another person, another place, or another viewpoint. Create a mental model that makes sense of the world. We create a mental model when we distill an idea, belief, or concept into its simplest understandable form according to our unique experience. Building a mental model then embeds a memory of the experience within us, and we become one with the narrative storytelling so much that it now has meaning. There are some underlying concepts to understand to make communal storytelling more effective. The first is causal agency. Causal agency is a power we use to take meaningful actions to see the results of our choices. It's another way of describing free will. We possess the freedom to make causes happen in our universe. In response, the universe answers with an effect that affects our perceptions of the universe and reality. This is known as effectance. The more causal agency we facilitate in our storytelling, the more effectance occurs, and the more the players engage in and take ownership of the story. The simplest form of this is the old Mad Lib books, in which the reader makes the story with random word choices. In our case, we are giving the readers a fully informed universe in which to practice this causal agency, and we all communally respond to the effectance of those choices. Communal storytelling comes in two forms: embedded narratives and emergent narratives. Think of embedded narratives as the story I am telling you. It is embedded in this space and time, and I have relayed the emotions and environment that affect my embedded narrative. It is the structure in which the player interacts with the universe I, as the storyteller, am creating. I then invite the player to engage the embedded narrative in their own way, making a mental model of it, and then respond with their own experience and memory to create the next step of the embedded narrative. A new narrative emerges when I becomes we. When I becomes we, the player is rewarded. Their experience is validated, valued, and incorporated into the communal story. They then become invested in the story's outcomes in ways they could not have before the emergent narrative replaced an embedded one. How you play is how you live. Role-playing a character in a narrative affects human identity, exploration, experimentation, and formation. This means that when we make room for the other to engage with our embedded narrative, to instigate a new emergent narrative, we have the opportunity to help them evolve into the best version of themselves. The earlier we include the other in the story, the more motivation they have in the universe we are creating. This also ultimately results in a highly positive reaction to our story because the other can discern and judge their involvement with the story, or say, "This isn't for me," and move on. This is vitally important when it comes to building community and providing care for our players. The job of the game steward is to provide a non-anxious, unconditionally positive regard to the person being cared for. Without anxiety, the story becomes a sandbox without agenda or needs implanting on it, which in turn means that each player can uniquely respond to the narrative in the way they need to. Unconditional positive regard means that the stewards are oriented to the other's work to evolve into the best version of themselves. This priority of placing the player above the steward in terms of care is how communal storytelling and gaming become a healing moment. The steward puts aside their power for the sake of uplifting, listening to, and making important the needs of the player. The dangers of the railroad or egoistic game management. When crafted with care, stories are the work of spirit that surrounds, penetrates, and binds all living things together. Stories are what unite our shared human experience. Stories can heal. When we share in communal storytelling, we move beyond our limited point of view into another person's lived experience and memory. This is why the work of the steward, the one who cares for those in their games, is so vital today. This is also why railroading is so dangerous when used as a primary tactic for those who run role-playing games, tabletop board games, and online gaming sessions. Justin Alexander, author of So You Want to Be a Game Master, describes railroading as when the game master negates a player's choice without their knowing it to enforce a preconceived outcome of the game master's unique design. Railroading is not necessarily a dirty word in the gaming world. When you buy a pre-written adventure from a publisher, you are playing a railroaded scenario written by professional game designers. Railroading becomes destructive when the person running the game railroads from only their perspective and lived experiences. There is no causal agency and no emergent narrative. In railroaded games, the outcome is only the embedded narrative, and effectance is a product of the one running the game, not the ones playing it. The reason for framing what we do as pastoral care is that in these scenarios, where the disinhibition effect is in play, stories require vulnerability, and truth-telling leads to personal development. We are not managing a game, we are caretaking the souls of the other. Our players are not pawn in our world, but people who are hungry for community, authentic relationships, empathy, compassion, and kindness. When I approach gaming in a way that does not meet the needs of my players, the only other option is that the players begin meeting my needs. The steward is a servant leader to the gaming community. There is a difference between what we call rules lawyers and railroading. Rules lawyers are folks who have managed, by virtue of some superpower, to memorize hundreds of pages of rulebooks and are literal fonts of information about the game. They know the intricacies of the rules of your favorite board game and will point out every discrepancy made in playing it. A rules lawyer will argue the difference between rules as they were written and rules as intended. A railroader, on the other hand, will use their knowledge of the rules to control the emergent narrative and safeguard their embedded narrative even at the cost of players' causal agency. The egoistic game manager, consciously or not, is concerned with the embedded story told from their singular point of view, But what happens if that point of view is clouded by racism, misogyny, phobias, generational wounds, or unhealed trauma? The players then live in that world with the one running the game, a world at least tainted by, or at worst governed by, the very elements that may have caused harm to the game manager in the first place. Making a good story is simple but hard. The framework is clear and concise, but the methodology requires authenticity, vulnerability, and brave space. We tell stories communally by calling players together and gifting them an embedded narrative that we have crafted based on research and the experience of the community as an audience. We welcome players to contribute to the ongoing narrative from their viewpoints and memories to create an emergent narrative, thereby transfiguring my story into our story. We do this so that we can all practice the real world in the made-up universe of our story, create new narratives that can heal the harm done to us, and inform our steps to heal the harm we have done to others. As stewards, we provide pastoral care to tend to the souls of our players, not run them through the story created from our singular perspective, and laden with our blind spots and unresolved baggage. We create a brave environment that allows the community to tell our make-believe story, and in doing so, we make space to change the real world.